afternoon. I'll be just talking about benefiting a regional economy with societal-driven innovation adoption in high-tech small firms. Myself and Kirsty McManus have collaborated on this presentation. It pulls together a substantial amount of research that we've done on SME innovation and high-tech innovation, including Framework 7 funded projects, a project that we had funded last year by Dell Connect, which looked into the whole area of social innovation and the social economy of Northern Ireland, as well as lots of other seed funded project work that we did with the benefit of InvestNI innovation voucher funding and also KTPs. So we're very grateful for all of that funding support so we can look at these things in much greater detail. Kirsty McManus is our Director of the Centre for SME Development and was formerly the Assistant Director for CBI Northern Ireland and also has over a decade experience working with SMEs. I've been working at the Ulster University Business School for the past 10 years. My area of specialism is innovation management, and I've been involved in over £4 million worth of European funded innovation and research projects, as well as over 40 academic publications. I was a member of the board of the European Network of Living Labs, which I'm going to touch on in the presentation. And also within our centre, I head up the Social Enterprise Value Incubator, which is our gateway for social enterprises within the Ulster University Business School. So just a brief overview of how we'll structure this session. We'll start off just by examining innovation per se, looking at traditional and more contemporary models and how that has affected our work. We're also going to look at the big societal challenges, and hopefully we can show you that although there's tremendous challenges out there, it's also a brilliant playground for anyone involved in innovation. We're also going to look at the startup model, rethinking the startup model, the traditional startup model. My PhD research was in university startups, so that was, I guess, my first inroads into this whole innovation space. But it's interesting to see how that model has evolved. We're going to look at some societal innovation models, and also we'll home in on innovation adoption in the social sector. And we'll finish with policy and future developments. Okay, so moving on. If we look at this linear view of innovation, this is the traditional way of we've always thought about innovation. From way back, it is still very much a dominant model in certain industry sectors. We're not saying that that doesn't exist. It certainly does. In a lot of important sectors, for example, biotechnology, there's still this technology push. But if we think about the first serious UK policy paper that was done in the 70s, the Bolton report, and we think about how our understanding and how our policies have grown up over the last number of decades, there's certainly been a shift away from thinking about this in terms of the most resources, the most expertise leads to the better innovation outcomes. We have learned a lot over the last number of decades, so that model does not hold. And it doesn't hold generically, and especially looking at this era with all the internet-enabled technologies and those possibilities. It's moving away from, in many cases, a R&D model to a connect and development model. And over the past 10 years, we've seen significant popularity of the open innovation concept, which is a really interesting take on how corporate organizations have successfully removed layers of bureaucracy within their R&D labs, how they have shrunk their underperforming R&D departments and adopted a more distributed, open and collaborative approach to innovation. And there's very good reasons for that, which we're going to touch on. So This linear view, although it's still apparent in some industries, it's too simplistic for innovation. Innovation isn't like any other process. If you think of another management process, for example, the recruitment process, you know there are certain things that you will do, and at the end, you will recruit to the best of your ability that desired candidate. Innovation doesn't work like that. Innovation, by its very definition, is inherently risky. The challenge for innovators in dealing with these societal challenges is how can we minimize the risk? How can we test the hypothesis of our business models for these innovations that we're trying to secure at an early stage? And that is, I think, the benefit of taking on board more contemporary approaches to innovation. So if we look at the big societal innovation challenges, there are lots of them. We know them. They're very topical. We in Northern Ireland are facing a lot of hard choices in terms of cuts to the public sector. But really, if we think about the innovation potential, the functionality with everyday low-cost technologies that are there for all of us to use, all of our SMEs, there is also a lot of opportunity to rethink how we deliver public services, to rethink how we deliver connected health services, to rethink how we tap into e-participation technologies for making our democratic processes more open and transparent. And if you go through each thematic area of each societal challenge, right through to energy efficiency, the bioeconomy, there is lots of potential to deploy available technologies to make those business models more effective. So I would be optimistic. This is a perfect environment at the moment for SMEs, for innovation, due to these societal problems, because they are good playgrounds for innovation. And if you look at the Europe 2020 strategy, for example, the Horizon 2020 funding mechanism that drops out of that, that is over 80 billion euros worth of money over a 5 to 6 year period. There's a lot of money there for organisations, SMEs, research institutions to apply for that. But 29 billion of that 80 billion is allocated specifically for these big, important societal challenges. So there's a lot of money there for addressing this. We know there's a lot of technology available, internet-enabled technology. There's open source technology. There's a website hosted by the European Commission called Joined Up, where there are a vast amount of technologies uploaded that is open source and there for everyone to use. So there's no excuses. If we think about mass innovations, innovations for the masses, one of the big challenges I can remember 6, 7 years ago, a Nokia executive stood up on a platform in the European Commission and stated the two biggest headaches that they had with their innovation was, how do we excite enough consumers at the outset for these hopefully big blockbuster innovations? How do we excite them? And also, how do we educate them to use our devices so they can use and avail of these opportunities? And that was one of the reasons why they delayed, for example, rolling out the SMS text messages. They wanted to do that several years before they did it, but the mass market wasn't ready. Those are old problems. We don't have those problems anymore. Those problems have been eradicated largely because if you look at the statistics there was a interesting study done recently by HNI, who had a sample of elderly people, the people that are furthest removed apparently from using these kind of portable devices, iPads, smartphones. They tracked their buying behaviour after they were introduced to these user-friendly devices, and 80% of them decided to go and purchase one afterwards. So we know the platform has become more accessible. So that behaviour change, motivating millions of people to use these medians for services, that has become less of a problem. So the message here is it's a great environment for innovation because of the funding, technology, and the lessening of these so-called constraints for engaging end users. But the thing that we need to consider is new ways of working more cleverly with government, with different government departments, thinking about additionality and many levels of additionality, and also thinking about the different impacts from different services in each department, how that can be leveraged and synergized, and also inform better innovations. So we think about the traditional startup model, and how that has been limited. This startup model is almost like a linear approach. You get the idea, develop a business plan, get funding, and you'll start up. That at each stage of that cycle, you're using traditional market methods to confirm your assumptions about the business model, to confirm the hypotheses that you think are correct about the business model. That model is not in play for lots of really innovative work. That model has been superseded. If you think about this post-stage, lots of organisations checking right before market entry, let's get the focus groups in, let's have a look and get feedback on this. It's too late. If you look at the classic example of the fax machine, that tells you all you need to know. The fax machine, whenever that came out, a traditional market focus group was called in to have a look at this. Do you think this is valuable? Do you think this is a good idea? Well, if they say no, it's a bit late. You've already invested all that money, that resources for a start. But the feedback was they didn't think it was a good idea. They didn't think it would work because they couldn't comprehend the value of that because it didn't exist. Henry Ford, if he had asked the people of the citizens of his era, would you like a car? Do you think a car is a good idea? Or how do we deal with this transport problem? They'd have told him, well, we just need a faster horse. It's the same kind of scenario. People don't have a lot of people, the average person doesn't have the foresight for these radical innovations, and they're not accurate or lean, efficient ways to do startup. Moving on, if we think about Europe, the first slide I mentioned, the European paradox, when we think about this linear model, Europe has always been world-class on research, no question, still is in lots of important areas. The issue is commercialising that. If you look at the Ulster Transport Museum just down the road, we have a rich history of invention, but we didn't commercialise a lot of those inventions. You see the science behind, technology behind the seat ejector in aircrafts, tractor. There's been so many inventions. It doesn't mean to say you're going to commercialise it. And that's the story of Europe. A lot of the European projects, Framework 5, 6, 7, where did they go? Those research and innovation projects, where did they go? How many of them actually rolled out into the market? It's low. It's, the Horizon 2020 tries to, in a policy context, take on board more clever innovation methods for projects, more clever ways of putting together consortiums, and that's part of the criteria. And I think there has been an improvement in that regard. But nevertheless, this is an ongoing problem. This is still in the in-tray of lots of European economies, this innovation model. How do we get away from no man's land? How do we get more commercialization? So if we think of the new startup model, the whole idea is you want to evaluate, confirm your hypothesis at a very early stage, shut down bad projects early. In other words, drown poor projects in shallow water, move on to something more fruitful. Don't waste too much resources on something that is not going to be commercially viable. That is one aspect of thinking, but how do you actually do that? And I think the previous presentation, the design thinking, that is fundamental. Design is so important for innovation and creativity, for elaborating the real latent needs, not your perceived needs, not people in laboratories with white coats on making assumptions about what end users would like, especially if you think about healthcare. And one of our biggest issues that we need to try and do better with in terms of an innovation offering, when you look at healthcare, the provision of healthcare, people in white coats in laboratories, whether they're technologists or from another discipline, they cannot do their innovation in their labs. You need to bring it into the field. You need to bring it into the real world settings where you are going to roll them out, where you want to get 100% user acceptance. And that's the whole idea behind a living lab model, that quadruple helix, engaging society with your traditional triple helix. And that's what we've been doing with our projects from Framework 7 right through to our methodologies for the projects in Horizon 2020. So we move on in terms of, I mentioned at the beginning, why are these large organisations that have so much resources, everything that they could possibly need, why are they underperforming? Why is there dearth of innovations coming out of these well-resourced large organisations? Well, I think this slide here elaborates some of the reasons behind that. If you think about a startup and compare it to somebody who's working on innovation in a large, wealthy, mature company, that person in charge of that startup will go to bed every night worried about their organisation, thinking about how they fix something better the next day. They bring it home. They have put their shirt on that business. That's the difference. People working in a mature, wealthy organisation, they're going to say, you know, if this doesn't work, you know, at the end of the day, it's not my money. I'm not going to lose my house. I'm not going to lose my livelihood. It's a professional relationship. Of course, they want to do well, but you're not going to match that dynamic, intrinsic motivation from someone that actually owns that and has ventured everything on that business. There's a difference. If you think about societal innovation, and I talked a little bit about the Living Lab model, our business model, when we think about it, when we do innovation projects, we need to answer the questions of market, technology, and society. So when we think about market, you know, of course, society is very important. Of course, the end user is important. I've just already explained the reasons for that. But we don't only take that on board. There may be some good reasons why an unmet user need has not been addressed really well. There might be an economic reason. There might be a market reason behind that. So you have to balance the commercial side of things with the market and also the appropriate technology. And as I've said, when we think about technology, you get drawn into naturally, that's R&D. We need to get our own R&D. We need to get our own technology that we invent. The idea here that I want to get across is there's so much free, low-cost, everyday technologies available for everyone. And it's opening your eyes to that and understanding what's available and how to apply it. One of our models of innovation that we've benchmarked was a model called Innovation Space at Arizona State University. And that was a great link that we developed on the back of the Twin City link up between Newton Abbey and Gilbert, Arizona. From that link, we were able to access Arizona State University, and we've developed a really great working relationship from that moment on. And they asked 4 questions in that model. What is desirable? So what is usable? What has a function? What has a purpose? What has a job? Innovators must do a job. What's valuable? So in terms of what's a market, quantify that market, and is there a gap? Is there entry? What is possible? That's looking at your technology. And finally, the critical question, what is good? Is this good for society? There's a lot of technology out there that's not good for society. There's a lot of technology out there that promotes, for example, more sedentary behaviour. And that is a critical question when we think about innovation, responsible innovation. Is it good? When we look at our own model, Ulster University has 2 living labs that are members of the European Network of Living Lab. We also use that methodology, as I've said, in our innovation projects. So in terms of connected health, if we map out how do we actually structure our methods and our relationships in conducting innovation projects, that slide is an overview of it, where it's user-driven approach. Users are our subjects. We have an appropriation regime, which is an important concept. It's not networking, but we try to appropriate ourselves with the right players so we can access good consortia, we can access good partners, strong technologies that are focused on a certain call, also the right user groups. So we have everything that we need to work with in order to conduct this Living Lab approach. And importantly, from an academic point of view, it's a multidisciplinary approach. If you look at healthcare, for example, there's a wide constituency of disciplines that needs to be inside the design of those innovation projects. So that is an example of how we work that quadruple helix living lab model. Moving on to a glimpse into the social sector and innovation adoption in the social sector. If you look at, in the US, they would call social enterprises non-profits. There's more than $1 trillion that annually flows through non-profit organizations in the US. They're an important intermediary between firms and government. And what we can see as well, confirming the points here, they are a brilliant source of innovative ideas and policies. When we think about living labs and we think about that approach and understanding the real latent needs, one thing we have found to be true with social enterprises, they really know the real latent needs within their communities because they're dealing with it day in, day out. If you need any kind of elaboration of is there a need, especially for a societal gap, they are very close to the customer, and I think that is one of their greatest strengths. If we think about what distinguishes effective non-profits or social enterprises, well, the first thing is to talk about is the collaborative approach. The secret to success in social enterprises has more to do with how non-profits work outside the boundaries of their firm. In other words, adopting that open innovation approach. Your resources, constraints, etc., isn't only within your organisation. How well are you connecting with your partners? How well connected is your business model? And if I look at some of the, in terms of, we think about scaling social enterprises, I was at the Emerge Social Entrepreneurship Conference in September last year, and to summarise some of the issues around how you would scale, good things to do if you're a social enterprise and you want to scale, some of the things that was mentioned was grow with authenticity. And what they mean by that is you remain focused on your core mission. So be on purpose, but don't get knocked off your purpose after 6 months or a year. Stay on purpose. Spend a lot of time on how you measure social impact. Remember, social enterprises are a societal-driven innovation. It's not only the business logic, it's also the social logic. So you need to be measuring both. It's easier to measure the business logic. You've got a balance sheet. You know what's coming in, what's going out. But there needs to be more time dedicated to measuring the social logic. Do what you're good at and partner the rest. A collaborative approach. Clear criteria on who you partner with and take baby steps before you decide to have a formal partnership. Those are some of the things that we learned, and I think that reflected a lot of the research that's out there on social enterprises. In terms of summing this up with some key points, work with markets. You know, there has to be an economic case for the business model, not just the social case, in order for it to be sustainable. That advocacy, that elaborates as well what we mentioned earlier, to be on purpose, stay on purpose, engage people. We've discussed this already, that's a living lab approach, and collaborate with other organisations. That lends itself to this open approach to innovation. So those are some of the criteria for effective social enterprises. I just want to wrap up a couple of things now, finally on some of the policy, and also signpost some of the future developments within the Ulster University Business School. One of the projects that I was involved in was a project called Napier SME, which was a large-scale SME innovation policy study that covered all of the EU 27 at the time, we're 28 now, but also Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the key question was, how do we pave the way for more SME-friendly R&D and innovation programs? And some of the research inputs behind that was we analysed over 180 R&D and innovation programs that were open or bespoke for SMEs, surveyed over 800 SMEs, and we held over 30 roundtable meetings. And we also created a European Council for SMEs, which was like a think tank, but it was SMEs 100 SMEs who met 4 times to give their recommendations. I won't go into all the recommendations. It was a huge amount of output, but there are flyers, I think, at the back of the room on the Napier report. The website is on the flyer. All the reports are downloadable if you want to look at that in your own time. All I want to do is summarise some relevant points in the context of this presentation. Out of the 16 policy recommendations from the voices, direct voices of the SMEs, you could say 10 of them are open innovation related. They lend themselves to the concept of open innovation, and they were voiced by SMEs. That's an interesting finding, in that open innovation is something that came from studying the actions and movements of large firms, but you have SMEs out of 16 recommendations voicing 10 policy recommendations to help them be more engaged with R&D and innovation funding at a national and European level if it was more open innovative. Policies that promote the quadruple helix collaboration and seed bottom-up projects were also issues that were brought up in the findings. In terms of collaboration, what type of collaborations were most significant for SMEs? The number one was SME to SME had a positive effect. And the second one was universities. The major significance of universities as repositories of large-scale research and also resources that are available and appropriate for SMEs. And we also found that open innovation policies, they can recognise the process of R&D and innovation without being linear. Policy can help integrate and protect the tailored involvement of SMEs in R&D and innovation projects. And also, one of the interesting policy comments was spin research into existing SMEs. It's hard enough to do business in general rather than spin off a new startup innovative company. So it makes more sense from the perspective of the SMEs of having more policies and mechanisms where that research is spun directly into SMEs. There's a brilliant example of that, special effects, which is a brilliant example of a social innovation based in Oxford, where there is gaze-controlled technology spun out of one of the universities that was used to address the fundamental issue of people that have very limited movement, very limited finger and hand movement. And what do we offer them through the NHS for enhancing their leisure time? There's nothing. That was the issue. And what they did with this gaze-controlled technology, they created a technology platform where there's a computer screen, and with the technology they can communicate using their eyes. They can also play games. They can do all kinds of quizzes, all kinds of interaction, and it's been a transformational social innovation. But that is given out for free. Nobody pays for it, and it's a 100 fundraising model, and that's how they have used a social impact. So we think about the REF. In the last REF, the REF exercise is our research quality assessment exercise that's done UK-wide, which is very important for us at universities. At our last REF, 20% of the metrics for the assessment was on impact. That's going to move to 25%. And that's not just economic impact and social impact. So for universities, there's a clear incentive to have more social impact with our spin-off technologies and maybe adopt more examples of special effects that have been so transformational for so many people. I just want to finish off with what we're doing now at the university. We have a conference that we're hosting on the 22nd to the 24th of June, which is the 21st ICE and IEEE International Technology Management Conference. The theme that we have on that is engineering solutions for societal challenges, and that is 50% industry, 50% academic. We've got large and small firms, high-tech firms involved in that. Boeing is a sponsor. Intel Chief Technology Officers coming over to do a keynote. We've got leaders from the Georgia Institute of Technology. We've got numerous European innovation projects that are going to be disseminated at that event. And it's really an open event for anyone interested in societal innovation. We'll certainly be bringing along as many interested folks from Northern Ireland setting. So anyone's interested in that, please get in touch. In terms of concluding, Kirsty, I mentioned at the beginning, is the director of the Centre for SME Development. That really is pulling together and consolidating our footprint in the Northern Ireland economy, especially the SME sector. I mean, this year is our 40th anniversary of the Ulster University Business School, and we have, if we tally up all the different ways in which we engage with industry, there's quite a substantial engagement, and especially with SMEs. The centre itself, the strategic aims is to create and promote flagship management and leadership programs for growth-orientated SMEs, and we're all the time looking for SMEs that want to get involved in European projects, innovation projects. The more that we can identify, the better it is for us, and we can facilitate their inclusion in innovation projects and research projects. Support innovation, capability building and competitiveness amongst SMEs, and become a thought leader and source of best practice for SMEs via our events, research and knowledge transfer activities and publications. So we have everything that we're doing within this centre that Kirsty has coordinated. We send regularly to our network of companies a newsletter to let them know what we're doing. We frequently have information events, funding events to try and match make SMEs with appropriate academics and create development opportunities. So I'd just like to end on the final slide, which just maps out the key dimensions of the Centre for SME Development in terms of our role, in terms of collaboration, networking, communication, and our lobbying potential as well within the Northern Ireland economy. Okay, so thanks very much.